Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Maverick Mindset Radio Show. I am Adam Williams.
And I'm Ashley Muckenop.
And this is the radio show for the dreamers and doers. It's for those who are willing to step into the arena.
Some call us the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers.
We don't accept the status quo. We leave the world better than we find it.
We approach each day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. We maintain a rational optimism about the future.
This is the Maverick Mindset Radio Show brought to you by me, Adam Williams. I'm remote today.
You are. You are. And I was trying to point to you when to go.
I was looking at my notes and then I saw you like flailing around. I was like, yeah, I guess I am the one that has to start off the show. Yeah.
Yes,
we've done this before though.
Yeah.
Where I've been remote.
You're remote and I'm in your chair.
How is it?
It's great. You know, I feel a little different when I sit here.
Mm-hmm. It's powerful. Plus, you get to look out the window.
Yes. Yeah. And this chair is more comfortable, I think, too. So I'm claiming it.
Okay. I'll let you. Yeah, I'm sure you can swap chairs before you leave the studio today.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think as most of the world is talking about election results today, we are not.
Nope. We aren't.
And it's funny because I'm down in Florida and I'm visiting with my parents, and we were talking about the election, and Erie County was really like this bellwether county. So there were a lot of reporters that had a lot of interest in people in Erie. So Jackie and I had a lot of requests, and I did one interview. They didn't pull any of my quotes, probably for good reason, but it was with the New York Times, and it was like, how is the economy affecting you and how's that going to affect your vote? And literally I'm having this phone conversation from the Overwater bungalow in Bora Bora. And so when the lady's like, how's the economy affecting you? I'm like, it's not, which is kind of the whole point of what we're trying to do, right? Like I try to create my own economy and I try to be empowered. And that's actually going to sort of reflect on today's show. It's going to come up a little bit because we're talking about core values. Yeah. So you're gonna find that one of my core values sort of relates to not letting outside forces affect me. So I don't know. Where do you want to start with this one? Because I have a whole bunch of notes.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what your thoughts were sort of opening this up.
Well, I think we need to establish what core values are and how we discover them. I think that's where, because I think some people get kind of confused of what they are and how you can incorporate that into your business. So I think let's define what core values actually are. But before we start that, we got to go through our regular where people can find us.
Yeah. Totally. So. And I like starting the shows with definitions because I think that, that sort of frames things for people. But before we get into that, where we can be found, Maverick Mindset Radio, we are streaming live on Facebook as we are every week. We've got the episodes up on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts now. We're streaming live on YouTube, of course. So if you're tuning in live or if you're listening to the replay, we would love for you to share the show, review the show, give us 5 stars. If you like what you have to hear, share it and help us spread this message. And then, of course, we are at maverickmindsetradio.com where you can use the code Maverick10 for 10% off merch. So share the show. Great show today on core.
Get your notebook out.
Cool.
Let's
I'm ready
with the quote. I picked this quote. I was looking at different ones and then I picked this, and I'll tell you why after I tell you what it is. Okay, so the quote is, core values serve as a lighthouse when the path is uncertain. And it's by Unknown. We don't know who said that, but I chose that because
that's a good one, though.
Yeah, I know. And I chose it because ultimately there are going to be times that there is a difficult situation or a question. The answer is not always clear and you don't know what direction to go. You don't know how to solve a problem. This just happened to us the other day in a meeting, and we were kind of all going back and forth and there was no clear answer. And Jackie says, well, let's let's take a minute and revert back to, our core values, and are we making an assumption? And right there, just bringing that up helped us to come to the solution of what we were going to do. So I think it's when something is unclear, you can always circle back around to those core values to help you find the answer. Because again, as our topic says, they're the foundation of your business. They're the foundation of success.
Well, I want to expand it a little bit too, because we're not just talking about business values. We're talking about personal core values as well. So, like, one of my core values is adventure and fun, right? Like, if I'm lacking those things in my life, I find that I'm off, right? Like, I'm just, my head is not where it needs to be. If I get stuck in a routine, if I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. So when I found that out about myself, that I seek adventure and that I seek fun, I remember this was another trip that we were taking down to Florida to visit my parents, and we got to the Erie airport, and of course we had the flight from Erie to Charlotte, and then Charlotte to Fort Myers, and our flight out of Erie was delayed because of the weather. And of course, everybody standing in line, everybody in the terminal starts freaking out because everything is ruined, right? Like, they're going to get there later, and they're not going to get to their destination, and it's going to cut their vacation short. And the airline, they're pretty used to dealing with this stuff. So I think they had to, they put some people in like a van and drove them down to Pittsburgh, because they were going to like Dallas, and there's a direct flight out of Pittsburgh. So they drove them in a van and then got them on a flight there. That worked out. And then other people going to Fort Myers were like put on other flights, and they were going to get there a few hours later or whatever. But I remember I got up so it was my turn. I waited in line. I got up to the desk, and the lady's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "Great. What can we do?" And she goes, "Well, you can come back. Basically, you can fly out 24 hours from now. Like, go home, unpack, come back to the airport in a day." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't really want to do that." I said, "How close can you get us to Fort Myers?" And she goes, "Well, I got a flight to Tampa that'll get there, 2 hours later than you expected." I'm like, "Perfect. Put me on that." She's like, "Seriously?" I say, "Yeah, I'll go on my phone." So what happened was that we rented a car. So we flew to Tampa, got in a car, and it's like we turned a situation where everybody was stressed out and freaking out and upset and like yelling at these people that had absolutely no control over the situation. But then, because I'm acting in conformity with my core value of seeking adventure and looking for fun, the lady was like, "Oh my God, you're so positive about this." I'm like, "Well, yeah, we're about to turn this into something cool. Like, now I get to drive down the Florida coast in a convertible if that's what we decide to rent." So yeah, it is more than just the business side of things. There are a couple good resources on core values too that we'll probably end up talking about today. But one of them is a Harvard Business Review article by a guy named Patrick Lencioni. And the article is called "Make Your Values Mean Something." So I pulled his definition of core values, although it aligns with your quote. But they are the enduring principles that define a company's culture. And I think that's what you were talking about. I mean, that's how it works for us. We're unsure of something or can't figure something out or don't know the answer. If we go back to that,
refer back
those enduring principles, we can generally find our way with it. I'm excited about today's show.
I think it's a way that it takes your opinion out of something. It can separate your own thoughts from something when you can go back and just rely on those. So I feel like sometimes it's a clearer view of the situation when you are basing it around your core values, when you're trying to make a decision or find an answer in something. Because, a lot of times we can just get kind of mixed up in our own thoughts or our own opinions or, our assumptions. And I think when you can circle back around to those, which again, you'll explain to us how we discover them, right? But again, they're put into place for a reason. And again, it's that foundation of not only your business, but like you said, yourself as well.
Well, isn't that really important too? Because I think one of the biggest struggles, especially for smaller entrepreneurial companies, is having employees that have confidence in making their own decisions. And, it can really limit your growth as a business if people are coming to you for everything, every question, every decision, and they're afraid, they don't know what to do. Well, if you can properly hire and train around your core values, you're going to find people that are empowered and that are confident in their decisions, and then it can really free you up and allow your business to grow. So I think that's a really good example. I think what a lot of people are used to with core values is, and I used to make this joke all the time, like we're used to like the corporate setting with the core values where it's the picture of the eagle flying over the mountains and it's got a word, integrity, printed on it, and they think that that's how core values are. So they find this to be a useless exercise because the effort wasn't put into really uncovering the core values for the company. And other than slapping it on a poster and throwing it up on the wall, they don't really do anything with those core
Right.
values. So I think that's a really good example of like, yeah, you got to live these things. You got to hire and
Hmm.
fire around them. You got to train around them. You got to celebrate when people are actually working and living in conformity with them.
So do you
Because
think
I think that they really lose their meaning.
how, so how, we know personally that we choose our own core values. How do you discover what your core values are in business? And then the second part of that, does that mean that someone's personal core values should be aligning then with the business's core values? But
Yeah.
how do you, because for me, I think you asked me this question before. I think when we were doing the segment on hiring and firing, what my core values were. And I really had to think about it because I don't really know personally. I know what ours are as the business, but I'm like, what are mine?
Yep.
I thought right away, I remember answering, like, yeah, I know what they are. And you're like, what are they? I'm like, So I've really been thinking about what those are. I have my top three, which is, contentment, positivity, and change. Those are things that I need, which change was new to me. I thought that never would be one because I was afraid of it. But then I realized I actually need it. I can't be in the same thing over and over and over and over and then thrive and grow. So I realized that's actually something that I need. And then I also realized that I don't work well and I can't function in negativity. So positivity was something that I knew that I needed personally, business wise, but then contentment. I was like, well, what did that mean? And that was just like, am I content in what is going on around me? That was very important to me to find, not different than happiness, different than all this, but like just content with what is. That was important to me. But it took a while for me to
Those are
really figure that out.
so that's a good example. So I mean, for Jackie and me, she and I have different core values,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're aligned
Yes.
and there's a little bit of overlap, but they're really different. And the businesses that we run have core values again. They're aligned with our personal core values, although there's not necessarily a perfect overlap. And the Venn diagram has a little bit of overlap, but they're not the same exact list. So I think it's really important that aligning the personal values with the business values is really important. So yeah, positivity is not one of our company core
Mm-hmm.
values, but we are pretty intentional about not having a toxic workplace, not having negative people all around us, like
Victim
being
mindset.
empowered. Right. Yeah. No. Victim mindset is a huge one for
Yeah.
us. Yeah. And those aren't core values, but they are sort of aligned with our core values,
Yeah.
right? Our values of finding the truth and figuring it out and being curious and not judgmental. Like positivity does kind of align with those things. Change as a core value for you, right?
Yeah.
Like it is, there's no overlap between that and any of our company core values, but we do tend to focus a lot on growth and
Right.
we aspire for growth. Well, if you're going to have growth, you're going to have change. Otherwise, your results are always going to be the same. So I think it's good to know those things,
Yeah.
to know that you can align with a particular workplace. So yeah, let's talk about the process a little bit because there's so many different ways to do this. So I want to go through the process and then I want to go through some common mistakes that people make
Yeah.
as they're discovering their core values. And I think that you can do this. I think the process is probably pretty similar on the business side and on the personal side. And I don't think there's a perfect way to do this, but my the probably the consistent piece of the core value discovery process, whether it's business or personal, or regardless of which expert you're asking, the process tends to involve making a really, really, really big list and then narrowing it down until you get to those 3 or 5 or 7 values that's it, right?
Yeah.
Like that gets down to the core. So the question is, how do you get as many things as possible up on the wall? How do you fill out that whiteboard with all of the options
Right.
and then start narrowing it down? So what we did in the business, we did it as part of the process of implementing EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. Is we wrote down the names of 3 people on our team that were really superstars. That if we had 1,000 of them, we would be unstoppable. And that were really the employees that we would want to keep no matter what, and that really helped the business grow. And so you make the list, and then what you do is you write down the characteristics or the attributes or the traits of those people that make them superstars.
That's a really good
So if
idea.
you've got, well, I didn't invent that, I stole it, but yeah, I mean, that's a good way to do it, right? So if you have a team, take the people from the team,
Yeah.
list out their characteristics, their attributes, their traits, and put them all up on the wall. And then you go through a process called keep, kill, or combine.
Oh.
Because you'll find that certain values, like once you get them up on the list, you're just going to say, we don't need that, right? Like that's not it. Or we want to keep it, like this is a non-negotiable. Or you'll find that there's like some overlap, right? So you may have positivity and you may have fun, and it's like, well, let's combine those into something
Yeah.
that they don't need to be 2 separate things, but they do kind of embody what we do. So that's one way, is to take people from your team, the superstars, the people that you want to clone and duplicate, and write down their traits or their characteristics. Another way that you can do this is to look at other companies that you admire or that you look up to, and you can figure out their values, right? And some of those companies are very public about this stuff. Like they make it clear what their values are. Others, you may have to really think about, what makes them great. So like a lot of business owners look to, like they admire Disney as a
Yeah.
company. So they'll look at the things that make Disney great and say, all right, so they're especially when you look at the parks, right? They're very clean, they're very well maintained. They're having fun, they're allowing people to dream, and they're allowing adults to be kids again, and they're I don't know. I mean, that you can make a huge list there. I've been talking about this one a lot because Walt Disney said people can feel perfection. So I've been bringing that up a lot of like, yeah,
Yes.
if you've ever been to a Disney park, you can feel how much effort and intentionality goes into those things.
It's a lot
So
different than the other
I think
parts.
looking at other, yeah, for sure.
Yep.
For sure, definitely. So that's another way, is to look at companies you admire, right? So if I look at, we talk about Andy Frisella and 75
Yep.
Hard and First Form a lot on this show. So if we talk about First Form, their supplement company, every order that gets placed, if you place the order by 2 p.m., it gets shipped out the same day. And every box that goes out has a handwritten note in it. So every employee that works at that company spends some period of time sitting at that table in that warehouse, handwriting notes to people, right?
Yeah. Personal
Well,
touch.
that's a company that I admire, and that's something that I would really aspire to, is like, yes, that personal touch and that expression of gratitude, and that level of customer service or creating the customer experience. Like those are things that I admire. Those are things that I look up to. So I would look at companies like that. First Form is another company that's very clear on their core values. So one option or one way to do this is to take people that work for you and write down the people that the superstars, right? And write down the things that make them great. Another way is to look at companies that you admire and write down their values. Or if you're doing this on the personal side, you can do it with people that you admire. So the first time I did this personally, I gave some examples of people that I admired, and I was working with a coach at that time, and she really helped me understand, like, yeah, one of the things I found was, if I'm not having an impact, like I admire people that have an impact. And if I'm not having an impact, I'm not really interested in doing the thing.
Yeah.
So like I served on boards of nonprofits in Erie that weren't interested in doing anything different or implementing anything new. They were there for the wine and cheese that came with serving on the board. Well, I left those organizations because
Yeah.
I wasn't having an impact, right? So I found out that that aligned with my core values. So that's another way is to look at people that you admire, whether they work for you or not. Um, and then two other ways to discover the core values. This one's really hard for me, not because it's like emotional, but it's a really challenging thing to do, is think about what should be said about you at your funeral or in your obituary. I think there are some people that are really good at this, but this exercise personally doesn't work for me, but it could work for others. I have a friend that rewrites his obituary every single year,
Really?
and he lives in conformity with. Yeah, I'm not really able to do that, but it does make you think a little bit,
Yeah.
and I think it can help guide things a little bit. And then the last way, and this is actually one that Jackie and I did recently, is just go and find a list of core values.
Yeah.
Like Google it,
Yeah.
right?
Easiest way.
There's no magic to that. Yeah, I mean,
When all else fails. Oh,
I
you know
actually
what?
did it.
Why don't you ask AI? Put in your
Yeah.
your characteristics.
You know what?
Go
I
ahead
bet you
and
could.
ask.
I bet if
yeah.
you, that's a throwback to last week's
Yes.
show on AI. But honestly, if you use Chat GPT enough, you could go in and ask it, what do you think my core values are? And I bet it would be pretty close.
Yes.
But yeah, you could tell it to generate a list of possible core values. Or you could tell it, hey, here are three people that I admire. What do you think my core values are? It'd be really interesting to see what it says. I actually did it. I bought this deck of cards. It's called The One Thing Core Values. So
Oh.
there's a book called The One Thing,
Okay.
and it's literally just every card has a word on it. And I went through and made two piles, yes and no. And I just whittled it down until I got it down to, yeah, like these are the ones. This is me. And I went through that keep, kill, or combine process. So I think like you talked about at the top of the show, a lot of people don't even go through this process and they
No.
don't realize what their values are. And
They just throw
if you're
something
starting with a
out.
blank piece of paper, that's it.
Yep.
I think I'm one of those people that I need to see it all laid out in front of me.
Yep.
So if I have the big list, I can narrow it down from there. Starting with a pen and a blank piece of paper might be a little bit more difficult. But like I said, there are people that could sit and write their own obituary or write what should be said about them at their funeral and create that, or start making that list of people or companies that you admire. And I think that can help you go through this discovery process. And what you'll find is you gain this awareness of yourself, and you'll discover like there are moments that were highlights or lowlights of your life where you say, you know what, that was a highlight because I was really acting in conformity with my core values, or that was a low light because I wasn't like it wasn't me. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing. It wasn't what I'm all about. So I mean, going through this process for me really created a lot of self-awareness, personally. And then like we said, it's helped the business too, because
Yes.
it can help everybody make decisions and head in the right direction.
So that brings me to my question. Once you discover your core values, once you have those laid out, like this is my foundation, right? Do you change them? Are they something that evolve, or is it important to stick to your core values? Like you chose them for a reason. And because I think that's the other part, like you can choose them. It's one thing to choose them. Now you're going to live by them. So is it important to choose them and keep them, and that's what it is? Or do you change them up? Is this a ever changing process?
That's a really difficult one because I think in an ideal world, they would not change. Like
Okay.
your core is your core is
Yeah.
your core. But the reality is, I think as human beings who learn and grow and adapt and change, they may change. And as human beings who are error prone, maybe we just didn't get it right the first time around, so we could learn something new about ourselves. So yeah, I mean, I think ideally you'd get it right, and they would guide you, and they wouldn't change. I think that's probably easier on the business side of things if
Yeah.
you get them right. Your core values your core values for your business, they're not your products. They're not your services. They're not your policies. They're bigger than that. So that a great company, and this comes from Jim Collins and Built to Last and Good to Great and some really classic books. They talk about companies like Sony that are great enduring companies.
Mm-hmm.
And they had values around innovation and making people's lives better. And because of that, Sony went from, I don't even remember, they made like waffle makers or something.
I did not know
And then
that.
eventually turned it into, yeah, well, I'm exaggerating a little, but it was some consumer product that they don't even make anymore. But then it turned into tape players and the Walkman and CD players and televisions and all these things
What they're known
that's
for
computers,
now.
all these
Yeah.
things that, exactly. But it all came from their value of innovation and making people's lives better.
Yeah.
So I think as long as those values were enduring, the companies could be successful. So yeah, preferably they wouldn't change. Here's what I see happening on our business is we have our four core values. I suspect we will add to that
Yeah.
list. I don't believe that those will change, and I don't believe that we will eliminate any. But I do think we'll likely add to that list, and we'll go through that process. On the personal side, I do believe it'll change because I keep learning new stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like one of my values, because of the paradigm that I had growing up and the family that I grew up in, one of my values for a while was hard work. Well, you know as well as anyone now, I no longer value hard work.
Right.
I value results. So how do I get those results regardless of how hard I have to work to get them? So yeah, that one for me
It
changed.
evolved. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think it's fair for that to happen and for those things to change. But since we're on the topic of whether they change, I think it's also fair to probably talk about some of the common mistakes
Yes.
that businesses make through the discovery process.
Yep.
And these come from Patrick Lencioni, and if you do any research on this, you'll always see these mistakes continue to come up. This is in the discovery process, right? There's other mistakes that people make in like the implementation and actually living them. But I think there's the three biggest mistakes that companies make when they go through this process of discovery. The first one is they find core values that are aspirational. So it's not reality. It's not how you actually are. It's how you want to be. It's more of a goal, right?
Okay.
And that's a mistake because I think it can be really discouraging if you're not living that value the majority of the time. So it'll be discouraging, but I think it also can break some faith, when the employees say, well, perfection is one of our core values and he showed up today with mismatched socks, right? Like that. So it's very easy to get away from that.
So you're saying,
or if you yeah.
you're saying then these need to be, they're not goals and they're not unattainable things. They should be something that you're actually doing. They should be something that
Yep.
is in your everyday. Like that's what you're pulling from, right? That you're,
Yeah.
okay.
So for our company, discipline is not a core value.
Right.
But it's something I aspire towards. It's not something I'm super great with, but it's something that I work on, and I think it's something that our business tries to work on. But it's not a core value because it's not the reality. It's more of we're working towards it and we're aspiring towards it, and we have that goal, and that's okay. But that doesn't make it a core value,
Okay.
because you're not going to be able to hire around that if it isn't something that actually exists for you now. Or you can't fire people who aren't living that value because it isn't your reality. So I think aspirational core values are really a problem. I think if you had a company where everybody works 80 or 100 hours a week and one of their core values is work-life balance, that's not gonna work.
Right.
So those aspirational core values aren't really core values. The second one is what Lencioni calls permission to play values. So these are table stakes, right? So like honesty is not one of our core values. However, if you're not an honest person, you're not going to work for us, right?
Right.
So it isn't, I think it's important that your core values are something, when you put them all together, they make your company unique. And I think permission to play values don't make you unique. If it's honesty, if it's integrity, if it's doing the right thing, like those are things that
Those are your
we want, but
basic,
they don't
yeah.
make us unique or special. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's a really common one. And then the third one they call accidental core values. So they're the things that got you to where you are, but they're not the things that are going to get you to where you're going.
Okay.
So, for example, in our businesses, we are very entrepreneurial. However, we do not need to be entrepreneurial 10 years from now. Like the hope is we grow to a point where if we have an accounting department with 5 people in it, they don't need to be entrepreneurial, right? Right now we do to get to that level, but eventually we'll get to the point where that's not necessary. So, we, like I said, hard work was a core value of mine and it got me to where I was, but it's not really one of my core values. It was more of an accidental thing that got me there. Innovation, right?
Yeah.
Like not all companies need to be innovative to continue to grow. It has helped us,
Yeah.
but I don't think that's going to be necessary for our future. So when you're uncovering these core values, when you're going through this discovery process, try to avoid the aspirational ones. Try to avoid the permission to play ones that don't really make you unique, and try to avoid the accidental ones. And that'll help you narrow this list down
Right.
even more.
Okay.
All right. So this is great. So
So-
we're talking about core value.
Yep.
Streaming live, blowing your minds every Wednesday at 9, Maverick Mindset Radio. Today we're talking about core values, personal and professional, personal or company core values. And this is going great. So what else we got?
So core values in hiring. And I think we touched a little bit about this before when we did our hiring segment, but is that something as an employer that you should be asking people when you're in that interview process to hey, what are your core values, to kind of have an idea? Is it, something that, okay, so they don't have them coming into it, they're going to learn them along the way. How is that important with the hiring process?
Yeah. So man, I didn't prepare for this question as much as I wanted to, but if you have, let's assume you've got 4 options. Option 1 is people who don't have your core values and who don't have the experience that you need. So those are going to be the D and F players, right? They're out. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who have the experience and who live your core values. Those are your A players, right? It's going to be hard to find all A players, but they're out there. And then your other 2 options are experience but not the core values, or core values and not the experience.
Yeah, touch on that.
So we've got a quadrant. Yes or no core values, yes or no on experience. You don't hire the people that are neither a core values fit and who don't have the experience. The people who have both, they have your core values and they have the experience, which may be very difficult to find.
Right.
They are the most difficult to find. Those are your A players and you keep them. But the other options, when you've got the choice between someone who has experience but doesn't live the core values, that is a C player.
Okay.
Versus someone who has the core values but not the experience, that's a B player. So I will always take the person that is a core values and culture fit without the experience, because I can train the experience, but training and getting people to live core values is nearly impossible if they don't genuinely believe in them and if they don't genuinely act on them. So yes, we are very intentional around hiring around core values.
And is that a mindset
and we make sure
thing? Is that a mindset thing that successful businesses or business owners need to start having? Because I feel like there was a time that it is solely based on experience. That's it. That's your resume. You are hired on your resume with the experience you have and the education that you have, and actually looking at core values or the discipline that people have or what they encompass as a person, like that was always came second. Do you think there is that shift now, and should there be that shift? Because I feel like there should be. I feel like experience isn't the, like you said that to me in my,
is a really
you said that in my interview. I can teach you anything, but do you fit into the culture? That's the big thing.
Yeah. So should is a really triggering word for me because again, I've been staying at my parents' house for the last 2 days and my mom still tells me things I should do. Would the world be better if people did this? Yes. Will they do it? No. Why? Because of mindset. So yes, my businesses will continue to win and continue to dominate and continue to grow because I do this. Other businesses that aren't clear on their culture, that have horrible, toxic employees, but maybe they're still able to achieve the results, like they're going to continue looking for that experience without consideration for culture and core values fit, and they're going to continue to struggle. That's the reality of this. So should they? Yeah. If you're listening to the show, you should go and do that. You should uncover your core values and you should hire around them as a starting point. And then we're going to talk about training and celebrating and firing around them as well. But yes, I mean, it makes your life so much easier. It makes your business so much more successful. So in business or with personal core values, I find that if I'm acting in conformity with them, I tend to be working from a space of inspiration, not of obligation. Like if I'm doing the things that really fire me up and the things that really feed my soul, I find that those are the days that I'm jumping out of the bed and just ready to rock and roll.
Yes.
Versus if I'm doing things that I have to do, I don't have that same mindset, right? So yeah, making sure that people are a culture fit is paramount to this. And then being able to train them on the experience side of things, or maybe they come in with some experience, but honestly, how different our businesses are, sometimes they come in with good habits and bad habits, and we got to break them of those bad habits, which can be pretty difficult. So
what would you do? You get a resume that comes in, and the experience part of it is at like the very bottom, but the first thing on their resume, they hit you with like, these are my core values. This is what my mindset, like, what if people started sending in resumes that was like the main things that when you look at, what would you do if you received that resume? I feel like I know what you would do.
I'm the only one who's going to look at that resume.
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to at least bring that person in for an interview, and I'm going to grill them on that to make sure that they're being honest about it and that they actually know it. Like we're going to dig in. But yeah, I think a lot of businesses are going to be dismissive of that stuff. But again, successful businesses where the founder uncovered the core values and as the business has grown, he's brought in leaders and other employees who live those core values. I don't remember if you and I were just talking about this, I think, where when our business started, I did the interviews. I was the only person, right? So I would come in and do an interview and make a hiring decision. We're now at that next stage where I am the last step in the interview process. So I did an interview yesterday with a guy who interviewed with you, did a written quiz, watched a podcast and a webinar that we sent him, interviewed with Jackie, and then he got to me, right? And it's my job at the end to make sure that he's a culture fit. Now, the next version of that, the next iteration of that is if we can build the team, so I don't even need to be involved in the process because everybody else understands hiring around culture and the other things that we look for, then great. I mean, that's the next version of that. We're not there yet, but that's definitely what we're aspiring to and what we're working towards. So yeah, I think from the hiring phase, it's important. So we make it really clear to people that our process is a little bit different. Oh, that's what we were talking about. Our process is inconvenient and difficult.
It is.
Because that's how success works. Success is inconvenient and difficult. That was such a great line.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, that's a great, and so on our written quiz, we ask people, why do you think we're asking you all these questions? And man, we get some really horrible answers, but the people who get it say, because you're not looking for just anybody. You're looking for people that are going to fit in with your team. And if they get to that point, they better understand that. So hiring around the values, firing around the values. This is another EOS tool called the People Analyzer, where you take the people on your team and you take your values and you rate them plus or minus or plus minus and whatever. We're not going to get into that today. But you can make hiring and firing decisions around it. And then I think it's really important to celebrate those things. So we created the penny jar at Pennywise,
Yes.
where any employee can go in and nominate another employee when they're doing something great or living or working with our core values or our guiding principles. And what were the numbers for October? We had like 60 some
Yeah. Yeah, it
nominations
was
for the
over
penny jar,
60. Yep.
which was more than the month. I thought when we launched it, we'd have a whole bunch of people saying, yeah, this is great in the first few days, but the momentum it builds and we're
It
doing more. So we're really celebrating
I think
people
people
living our core values.
yeah, and I think I think people might think, "Oh, a penny jar? Like really? Can't you just say thank you?" But I think what we've discovered is there is, and I think it says a lot about our team too, that wanting to help, that wanting to help your teammate find the answer, to say, there's people that you have the answer and your teammate's looking for it and they're like, not my job, they can find it. But to want to say like, no, I got it here. Like, let me get that to you. I think what we are growing into and learning is that there is we are encouraging and motivating each other to keep doing that. And so that's why our penny jar thank yous are, we're recognizing the help from other people, and we're
Yeah.
recognizing the job that people are doing, and then saying thank you for it. And I think it
So
doesn't sound as small
that's
as
another
it
great
seems.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another great example of like, I want to have a workplace and I want to be a person that expresses more gratitude. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to have a workplace where we express more gratitude to each other. Is it a core value? No, because I more often than not, I don't live it. I tend not to express enough gratitude to people when they do things. But it's something that I'm working towards. So that's a great example of like we're creating that in our culture, even though it's not one of our core values. So would I hire someone that doesn't always express gratitude? Yeah, sure. Would I prefer someone that's like really grateful for things? Of course, but it's not a deal breaker for us. On the other hand, would I hire someone who's really judgmental and not curious about things? No, that's one of our core values.
Yeah.
I don't, there's no room for that in our business. You need to be curious and not judgmental. And that's our first Ted Lasso reference of the day.
Yes.
Um, but that's because it's one of our values, and we're gonna hire and fire and train around that. So, but I think it's also really important to, and if we're still talking about interviewing in
Yeah.
particular, I think it's really important to not be obvious about questioning that. So you can't just say one of our core values is be curious, not judgmental. Do you like that? Or are you like that? And then like you laugh. We've had people do that in interviews. One of our core values is figuring it out. Are you able to figure things out? Yes.
Very
So
well
you got to be,
beyond that. You gotta.
yeah, you got to be less stupid about it. So, for example, being curious and not judgmental, we may ask people, what's something that annoys you at work?
Hmm.
Well, that's going to trigger some judgmental stuff. So you listen very carefully to how they answer that. How have you worked with someone? Give me an example of a time when you had to work with someone who was difficult to get along with. Well, we've gotten answers that say, well, they were just a huge jerk and I avoided them. Wrong answer, right? Like
Yep.
we're gonna look for something a little bit different there.
Well,
So I think it's really, yeah, go
what's
ahead.
nice, you do this a lot. You and Jackie both do this. And it's, I think this is important for business owners or even managers to know, is that, there's times I know I've come to you and I'm venting and it's an immediate, you're like, did you think about if this is the reason why they did that? Or maybe this is why this is happening. And it's again, brings us back to one of our core values is be curious and not judgmental. And I sometimes have to stop and think, "Oh, I didn't think of that." So again, like I can get caught up in my own thoughts and feelings about something, and not even like, you can bring it back around to those core values to give a more unbiased approach to things, or look at it from a different viewpoint. And I think that's really important. And I think that's why those are important in the workplace to circle back around to, because that, I know you do that a lot to me. So
Well, it makes it easier, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're religious, right? You're making a decision. Well, what do the Ten Commandments say, right?
Hmm.
Like that, it's easy to be guided by that stuff and make better decisions because of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's really, I mean, this is not something I wish that we better defined our core values earlier in our business because I think it would have really simplified things for us. I think it would have really helped keep us focused. I think it would have helped us avoid a lot of mistakes. But it wasn't until, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago that we went through this process and realized, yeah, like this is what defines us. We
Yeah.
find the truth, we figure it out. We're curious and not judgmental, and we take our job seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. Like
Hmm.
that's it. If you check those boxes, you can come and work for us and we will find a job for you. But I also think it's important to understand like don't go and steal those values word for word, all four of them, and plug them into your business, thinking, well, it
Because
worked for
it's,
Adam, it's not going to work for us.
yeah.
It may not, but I think it's really important to understand, like, if again, maybe we're people or maybe we're a business that you admire, and those are our values, and you can give some thought to that. But there are a lot of workplaces where taking your job seriously but not taking yourself too seriously would be a problem.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the joking can go a little too far. It can make you lack focus, and maybe you want to be a more buttoned up workplace, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that's really important for people to understand when Jim Collins did all this research for his books. These are best-selling books, and they're like the standards of business books that people should read. What he found was there were no right answers for core values. Like there was no overlap of these great companies and these enduring companies that he studied and the ones that really changed the world. There wasn't any overlap with the core values. Rather, it was a question of do they have core values or not?
Right.
So that's the starting point. I mean, you asked earlier about do they
Yeah.
change? And it's like maybe, or maybe you learn something new. But the reality is, if you go through the process and uncover these things and learn them about yourself and or your business, that is the secret sauce. That's the secret to success that you may or may not get them right. But the reality is, like Enron, right? One of Enron's core values was honesty, which is a great permission to play core value. They didn't really live that, obviously, which created some other problems.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, there's no right answer for core values. It's really a question of do you have them or not, and do you actually live in conformity with them? And you'll find that as a business grows, again, it creates more success because as a business gets farther removed from the founder,
Yeah.
and brings in people on the team, it's very easy to lose sight of those values
I
and the
was
things that
I was
have
always
made you
afraid of
successful.
that as we were growing. I remember I said that to you. I'm like, my fear is when you get further away from the team, right? Which is a natural thing. That's the point
Yeah.
as the business grows. But my fear was the people coming in as that replacement wouldn't. I grew from you and Jackie, so to replace that and not have that same thing could be very detrimental to your team if that like if you're not there. So it's like everything, you guys set that standard, those core values, that foundation, and if you're going to remove yourself from it, whoever steps into that and in your team, like it has to follow what
Yeah.
what you put in place.
It could completely sink the business if
Yes.
we didn't keep a focus on it.
Yeah.
Sure. So here's an example of something that we're doing that I think helps, right? I am not a huge fan of like forced mentor-mentee relationships. I think they're disingenuous. I think they have to come naturally. I just nobody's invested when it's forced. But one thing that we're doing, not under the name of a mentorship program, is making sure that new hires have a lot of involvement with the people on our team who best embody the core values.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we didn't do this, if we just threw a new employee into the mix and didn't, like, I do training on the core values when they start, but then we also get them involved with someone who understands the core values and who actually lives them.
Yep.
If we didn't do that, here's what would happen. A new person would come in, some random would be training them and say, well, Adam and Jackie say to do this, but we actually do it the other way, right? The
Yep.
company says this is how we do it, but in reality, we do it this other way. So we're very becoming more and more intentional of making sure that the people that coming in are living those values from day one, so that as we grow and as we expand, I mean, right now, our most recent hire, she's in Washington State. The
Mm-hmm.
interview that I did yesterday, the guy's in Texas. So yeah, I mean, you talk about being removed from the founders. Like these are not people that are going to be in our office seeing this
Yes.
every single day. So we've got to make sure that they understand what our values are and how we live them, which is why we do our monthly meetings with the team and we celebrate our values and we talk about them and we share stories and examples. This is why we in our Ring Central, like our company chat, like we talk about, you see our values and you see these words come up so often because we're
Yep.
celebrating when people are acting. So it's like these are permeating the whole business. They're not just posters on the wall.
When
I
I
think
was
that's
going to
the
ask
really important.
you, I was going to ask you that how important is it to make sure that those core values are constant out there, not just, throw back to Ted Lasso, like the belief, right? That's important for people to see every day. And it's important to tell, why is it so important that those core values and the celebration of them and are constant, constantly being bringing up and introduced to the team? Why that's an important thing, right? Like that needs to happen.
Well, because you need those reminders,
Yeah.
right? Like it's even though I have my personal core values, I still need to pull out the list every once in a while and look at it. And because I'll find that if I'm a little bit off or if
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired or unmotivated or just not feeling it, I'll find that I'm not getting enough of my personal core values in my life, right? Like I get in that rut or I get in the routine that's just boring and uninspiring to me. So yeah, I think it's really important to remind myself about it. And so it's even more important to remind the rest of the team and just keep these things front and center. It's really funny. I don't even know why I didn't bring this up earlier, but you bought me this Lead It Like Lasso book for
Yes.
Bosses Day. I
Yes.
finished it. So
Oh, did you
I
finish it?
finished phase two. I finished phase two of 75 Hard on Monday, 2 days ago.
Nice.
I finished the book. I decided that I was on the plane on Monday, so I just finished the whole book. But it's pretty interesting because they take a lot of these concepts, vision and mission and core values, and pull the stories from Ted Lasso, and they give some of the different characters and explain what some of their core values are. So, for a cute and entertaining show like that, there were a lot of valuable lessons, and these folks actually took the time to put it all together. So it was a pretty interesting read
Nice.
for someone who really appreciates Jim Collins and core values in business books, and for someone who really appreciates Ted Lasso, like this sort of, you know, bridge those two things together, which I thought was really cool and really interesting. So that's another reminder to everybody that if you're in a leadership position of any type and you haven't watched Ted Lasso yet, you're failing as a leader.
Ted Lasso
Um,
and the Bear.
so yeah, I mean,
Yep.
the bear.
Don't forget that
Yeah,
one.
the bear's a good one too, because you can once you spend a little bit of time on this, right? Like if you finish this episode and you just go Google list of core values and you see them out there, you'll recognize them in other
Yeah.
people, right? Like you will look at Carm from the Bear and understand what some of his values are and why there's often like tension and conflict on that show because there's other people who don't live the same values that he does. Even there's a scene where the guy who invested in the restaurant is looking at receipts and they spent like $12,000 on butter. And Carm's like, well, it's the best butter, right? And the investor's like, oh, well, then we should have spent $20,000 on this butter, right? But Carmy aspires for excellence, right? Like that's
Yep.
and perfection and that Michelin star, and that's what he values versus the guy who invests in the business is like, hey, I want to get a return on
Yeah.
this and I want to make a little bit of money. So there's some conflict there.
All right. I think
For
we're
sure.
almost down to 30 seconds. What are our closing thoughts on this? What are the action items?
I think it's spend some time thinking about this. I think it's look out the window, download a list, buy the one thing core values cards, and go through this process and start thinking about what your values actually are and how can you repeat them and live them and be more consistent with them.
And what's your closing line?
Have a great week. I believe in you.
Perfect.